Lorwyn, Shadowmoor, Morningtide, Eventide. Sets of Magic the Gathering that all take place on the same plane, with each having distinctly different aesthetics. Most worlds in MTG are built to be cohesive. Characters, places, ecology, races, they stick to a reliable script that helps you to easily identify the plane that they come from. This is world building. But today we examine a world that subverts this idea, one that bridges the gap between two distinct feelings and openly switches between them. These are the secret tribes of night and day, the duality that is Lorwyn. Lorwyn, a world of perpetual midsummer, a green sapphire placed at the furthest edges of the multiverse. Lorwyn is seldom traveled to by planeswalkers, but those who have visited this world through the blind eternities recant an almost idyllic utopia of peaceful rolling hills and lush, abundant forests. Unlike most planes, the concepts of strife and want seem to be in short supply here. Sure, there are the rare skirmishes between the established races and tribes here, but all in all, it's a plane almost as perfect as one could be. That is, almost. The truth is, as pleasant as Lorwyn appears, it too hides a dark secret, a mirrored reality, one that reflects the world itself and inverts it. At shrouded dusk, Lorwyn becomes Shadowmoor. On Shadowmoor, green is an abstract concept, as vegetation wilts and dies. Farms fall to shambles, as famine runs rampant. The docile demeanors of Lorwyn's denizens gives way to the ugliest emotions one can think of. It's a plane turned on its head, but those who live here aren't even aware this change occurs. Lorwyn and Shadowmoor are more like two realities sharing the same plane of existence, rather than the plane itself going through some change. The physical realm, the people, the places, they remain the same, but reality is altered, as if, as the change occurs, people hop into a different timeline. A timeline in which Shadowmoor has always existed. Their lives in this dark, foreboding, unpleasant land, it has a history, and to them, it has always been and always will be Shadowmoor. When this change overtakes Lorwyn, every night as the sun sets and the plane becomes Shadowmoor, the denizens in their new forms continue the lives they left off from the previous night. And as the darkness breaks with the rising sun, their lives on Lorwyn, with all their sunlit memories of joy and merriment, continue on from the previous day, with each reality none the wiser to the existence of the other. On this world, every being lives a double life, and they just don't know it. But who are the denizens of this world? What is their culture and attitudes when bathed in the plentiful glow of Lorwyn's endless days? On the plane of Lorwyn, the world plays host to all manner of strange creatures and odd monsters. While some of the civilized races here may seem familiar, there exists an ever-present air of something just being off about them. They hardly fit into traditional molds, and things only get weirder as the plane itself goes through an ecological change. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Humanoid creatures on Lorwyn are categorized into tribes, which traditionally support themselves and stay pretty isolated from other groups or races. Lorwyn is very much a tribalistic plane in that there is little cooperation between the various civilized races. Trading and communication does exist, but as a general rule, tribes only care about the safety and prosperity of their own kind, making Lorwyn the perfect plane to play with supported tribal mechanics in Magic the Gathering. These are the Tribes of Lorwyn. Let's start off with a very strange creature, which doesn't really have a supported tribe in and of itself, but actually is every single other tribe on Lorwyn. The shapeshifters, known as Changelings, have the unique ability to change their bodies to fit whatever object or people are around them. Now, these transformations aren't considered perfect, as you can easily tell when a changeling is trying to mimic another person. They're given away by this translucent glow that shimmers across their skin, and let's just say their transformation is hardly perfect. Still, changelings are a very mysterious race on Lorwyn. Their nature is rather docile and oftentimes playful, which means they actually get along quite well with other races on Lorwyn. Still, they mostly live solitary lives. Not much is known about how changelings reproduce or what their social structure might look like. So while the changelings can actually be any tribe on Lorwyn, they lack the necessary traits to be considered a tribe in among themselves. Lorwyn is one of the few planes in the multiverse that doesn't have its own native population of humans. The closest relative to humans one can find on Lorwyn would be the kindly Kithkin. Immediately, Kithkin give off a halfling vibe. That being, they're basically small humanoid creatures known more for their quick, agile movements than their physical strength. On Lorwyn, they cherish values such as community, honesty, and cooperation, traits that go a long way in preserving the Kithkin tribe from threats. To the Kithkin, cooperation is everything, and this is because they share a collective consciousness known as the Thought Weft. The Thought Weft is a type of tribal magic that connects the minds of all Kithkin, making communication, even across great distances, effortless for this tribe. The Thought Weft also acts as an empathic web, sharing every individual Kithkin's emotions and thoughts with the collective. Every Kithkin can quite literally walk a mile in any other individual's shoes, meaning they're quite a perceptive race, tuned to better understand the feelings of others and relate to them. This creates a strong social network for the Kithkin, one dominated by friendliness and empathy. This is why it's nearly impossible to see a feud happen between members of the same clan. A Kithkin civil war is unheard of. The sharing of ideas from group to group has gone a long way in advancing Kithkin technology, as one breakthrough is quickly adopted and improved upon by the collective. This has led to the Kithkin of Lorwyn to be some of the most ingenious thinkers on the plane, and arguably one of the most technologically advanced. They are renowned craftsmen and engineers, creating balloon-driven air vehicles while other races still rely on flying animal mounts. This collective knowledge is also used in their magical practices, making Kithkin skilled alchemists and powerful mages specializing in healing salves, barriers, and auras. The Thought Weft not only allows for a civil pact of sorts, it's also imperative for their martial independence. Not being a physically apt race, the Kithkin could have, in years past, been easily taken out by stronger tribes such as the Elves or Giants. But the Thought Weft provides the Kithkin with a tactical advantage and unparalleled cooperation even in the heat of battle, with commands and strategies being relayed in real time. They are some of the most efficient and pragmatic battlefield commanders, being able to think with 1,000 minds and execute orders almost like it was instinct, making the jovial Kithkin some rather underestimated opponents. When the Kithkin do go to battle, they rely on stories and customs passed down to them by their ancestors in the Book of Kith and Kin, an ancient tome categorizing their people's triumphs and failures. Kithkin society is a tight-knit world of kinship and camaraderie. They're mostly a farming people, tending to land and livestock like the Springjacks, a goat-like creature the Kithkin often ride to battle and also farm for their milk and wool. Kithkin live in villages known as Clachens, where its mayor, known as a Sen, presides over important matters. Big Clachens such as Gold Meadow and Kinsbale become epicenters of Kithkin society, and important leaders such as Gadak Teague are looked at by others as rock stars of the community. Another living legend of the Kithkin is the stout ranger Bridget Bailey from the Clachan of Kinsbale. Bards sing stories of her many victories repelling invaders with her remarkable aim at the bow. She was even able to assist in the massive events that plagued Lorwyn in its plain story. She's gone down as one of the true heroes in Kithkin lore. A big part of the public life of a Kithkin revolves around civil practices, such as celebrating the Lamastide holiday. It's a time where Kithkin come together to dance, drink, and most importantly, strengthen the Thought Weft. The bonds of kinship can be frayed throughout the years, and this Lamastide celebration is a means of repairing those damages and ensuring that the Thought Weft is never lost. The Lamastide is also a time to share in stories and myths, to reinforce their faith in the greater elements of Lorwyn. These are beings that embody abstract concepts like dreams, love, and guile, who the Kithkin see as powerful omens and shapers of the future. Kithkin, by their very nature, are a rather suspicious tribe. Because of their Thought Weft, they're adept at feeling the emotions of their own kind, but struggle to connect with those outside of their race. While Kithkin aren't known to be aggressive to outsiders, they're always treated with a certain amount of suspicion. Kithkin are a fairly isolated race, insulated by their own culture and strange customs. While courteous and kind, A stranger ought not press their luck when treated as a visitor. The Treefolk of Lorwyn are by far the oldest sentient race on the plane, as well as the longest lived. Treefolk here, much like treefolk on other planes, are sentient trees able to walk, think, and communicate with others. They're, in all real respects physically, a tree that has the magical ability of free will. As such, the treefolk here begin life simply as any other tree would, as a seed that's been pollinated, planted, and taken root. In fact, a treefolk can grow and be confused for any ordinary tree for the greater part of its early life. It's not until a process known as the rising occurs does a Treefolk of Lorwyn take on its normal physical attributes and wrenches itself from the earth. During its formidable years, treefolk grow in nursery groves, watched over by mature treefolk who protect it as their guardian. While rooted, the potential treefolk absorbs the ancient knowledge of the plane learned by this race over the centuries. In this, they share a communal history of the world much in the same vein as Kithkin share a single consciousness. When the rising takes place, the young treefolk become mobile and set out on their own to share their ancient wisdom of the world with those they deem worthy of it, eventually settling down and creating a grove of their own. As some treefolk's groves can be massive in size, they often expand into small Kithkin villages. So long as their non-tree residents respect the sanctity of the grove, the treefolk guardian of said grove would in turn protect that Kithkin village, showing that this race can be protective towards more than just its own kind. As they're just sentient trees, Treefolk of Lorwyn aren't defined as a single species of trees, but rather can awaken from any number of different tree variants, all with differing attributes and personalities. Ash treefolk, for example, are seen as generally the friendliest variety, while also being some of the strongest warriors and wisest lore keepers. Black poplars are scholars of healing arts. They're shamanistic by nature, and they heal other treefolk by magically absorbing whatever pains the victim into themselves. In that, the black poplars are some of the most selfless treefolk out there, taking on the pain of others. However, this leaves many feeling bitter and secluded. Rowan treefolk are by far the most magically inclined. They're the traditional mages and scholars of this race. While mysterious, speaking often in riddles, they're approachable and offer help to other sentient races. Elder treefolk are the longest lived of this long-lived species, with many being ageless leaders of great groves and treefolk communities. They produce a special flower often used in Kithkin healing salves. Oak treefolk are the great warriors of this race, growing far taller and stronger than any other of this tribe. The tallest among them are known as Cloud Crowns, and can stand up against even the mightiest of giants on Lorwyn. And finally, there are the rare yew treefolk. This is an elusive variant of this tribe, that once numbered in the thousands, but have since gone nearly extinct. The yew are clever, crafty, but also mischievous with poisonous berries. On record, Kolfanor was the final yew treefolk on Lorwyn, and played a huge role in the storyline of this world. While Kolfanor may be one of the most famous treefolk of Lorwyn, another character many Commander players would recognize is Doran the Siege Tower. Doran is a gigantic black poplar treefolk, whose age has bestowed to him thick, unyielding bark. He's a rather gentle treefolk, preferring to travel Lorwyn in search of knowledge and sharing what secrets he has learned to whomever seeks them. Doran practices a unique type of shamanism that enhances the natural durability of treefolk's bark, turning their strongest defensive aspect into an equally potent offensive weapon. As he wanders, you can often hear him muttering his mantra. Each year that passes rings you inward with memory and might. Wield your heart, and the world will tremble. The merfolk species of Lorwyn are known as the Merrow, and unlike many others throughout the multiverse, the Merrow of Lorwyn have the tails of fish and thus are unable to traverse on land. This is rather odd for merfolk in Magic the Gathering, as we have several examples of bipedal mobility found in this race on other planes, making the aquatic-locked Merrow of Lorwyn a unique interpretation of this race. There are some examples of Merrow possessing strong magic that can allow them to travel by land, but the majority stick to the water. While bound to the water, the Merrow still provide an important purpose to life on Lorwyn, filling the roles of essential merchants and couriers to the other denizens. Lorwyn as a plane does not have any oceans or even large lakes. Rather, the world is dotted with channels and systems of rivers and streams. They act almost as roads for the Merrow, able to bring them to all the far-flung corners of Lorwyn. This series of waterways are known as the Merrow Lanes, for obvious reasons, used by this tribe to quickly get to any destination they want. It's easy enough to track the Merrow lanes as they crisscross above the surface, but what many don't realize is that they extend far below in subterranean canals and tunnels that allow this race to travel without disruption. As a Merrow dives deep below the surface though, they face the dangers found in the dark meanders. Most Merrow avoid these treacherous deep waters because of their lack of light and dangerous predators. But still, some more adventurous Merrow regularly explore this unknown. Though dangerous, these underground systems allow the Merrow to get almost anywhere in Lorwyn, even right up to city centers via their well water, making market transactions surprisingly effortless for this waterbound tribe. Much like the Treefolk of Lorwyn, Merrows class themselves into certain traits and occupations based on the type of schools they're a member of. Schools are designated groups of Merrow who either share similar traits, values, or skills. Each school is led by a Regiri, which is sort of a mix between a teacher and a government leader, much like the Sen of the Kithkin. There are 5 known Merrow schools, which include the Stony Brook, a group of merchants and collectors of aquatic trinkets. They're often trout herders and craw herders, which essentially corral these marine life forms for farming purposes. The Werewinders. These are what you describe as gossipers of the Merrow tribe. They use the Merrow lanes to venture into town centers and through the well systems converse and, well, gossip and exchange secrets with the denizens there. These type of merfolk are known locally as Wellgabbers. The Silvergill. These are the police force of the Merrow, merfolk that ensure the integrity and security of the Merrow lanes. They're known as Tideshapers and Aquatex, Merrow who are skilled in water magic to help repair and reinforce the riverbanks. The Paperfin. These are the mischievous scribes of the Merrow tribe. They understand the Merrow lanes better than most, making them excellent companions for travelers, acting as what this group calls rudders, or Merrow lane guides. And finally, the Ink Fathom. This is the most elusive and misunderstood school of the Merrow. These merfolk are obsessed with the Dark Meander and frequently travel to the darkest depths in search of ancient or lost knowledge of their ancient people. It is a risky and dangerous profession, but the Ink Fathom see it as their solemn duty to plunder the black and forgotten past. One of the most famous of the Merrow is Sig Goran Golalula Silvar, or otherwise more simply known as the River Guide. Because of his profession, Sig is considered a rudder, a Merrow who uses their knowledge of the Merrow lanes to guide others. While he could belong to any of the schools, Sig is likely a Paperfin, who are known for their great navigational skills. Sig is friendly almost to a fault, assisting in the story that would take place in the Lorwyn set. Elementals in Lorwyn take on a similar role to the gods found on the plane of Theros. If the mortals of this plane believe in something and believe in it strongly, then it can coalesce into a physical form and exist for as long as it's believed in. These entities are powerful and aloof, acting upon the aspect in which spawned them, and not really deviating outside of that. They have no real aims or goals or allegiances, purely acting out that which created them in the first place. The vast majority of elementals on Lorwyn are of the lesser variety, spirits and echoes of feelings being expressed in the here and now. They're often fleeting, but much more aggressive, only lasting as long as this temporary emotion is expressed. The best example of this would be elementals of war, strife, and despair. These specific elementals may spring up when active war or battle is taking place, but will only exist for as long as that conflict rages. Once peace has returned, it's possible to see these elementals go extinct. This is just one small example, but in truth, any event with strong emotional ties that cause heavily felt feelings to occur in mass can cause elementals to spawn. By contrast, there exist beings known as the Greater Elementals, those worshipped by many denizens on Lorwyn, including the Kithkin. These are more powerful, almost permanent elementals that represent more natural and static ideas of vigor, hostility, and guile. Their presence is seen as an omen, a prediction of what the future can bring, as they're chained to those specific values and their powerful magic can cause almost anything to happen. Their physical form is just as strange as the abstract ideas that inspired them. Many of the greater elementals take on a strange mosh-posh of animal forms. Because of their huge size, greater elementals cannot be ignored. But still, they're simple creatures who care little about the tribalistic conflicts of Lorwyn's inhabitants. Though the lesser and greater elementals may be absent-minded of the struggles between the Lorwyn tribes, a close relative to them is often caught right in the middle. These are the Flamekin, humanoids made of pure fire and stone given life. Their origins are a mystery, but because of their physical attributes, many have speculated that they're the offspring of a greater fire elemental. Whatever the case, Flamekin are incredibly passionate, with an intense drive to accomplish greatness. They have a will and mind of their own, but many are driven to prove themselves as valuable players on the Lorwyn stage. In the past, Flamekin have been treated with much suspicion and kept at arm's length by the other tribes of Lorwyn. Because of their fickle nature, making a deal with a Flamekin was seen as a terrible investment. A Flamekin's mind could change on a dime depending on how they're feeling. They also tend to burn rather hot. Not physically, but emotionally, prone to outbursts with a, pun intended, fiery nature. Funnily enough, the actual flame coming from their bodies burns cold. However, a Flamekin can turn up the heat, as it were, using its body as a weapon should it choose to. As the landscape of Lorwyn changes and tribes are becoming more and more important, some Flamekin have looked to distance themselves from their people's previous stereotypes. A group known as the Bright Hearth routinely send out envoys to other tribes in order to boost cooperation with the Flamekin and repair their tarnished reputation. The Bright Hearth go out and provide essential services to villages to build up goodwill, such as providing flame-lit light fixtures and materials for bonfires, or assisting with fueling local smith furnaces. Regardless of their beliefs, all Flamekin have a spiritual connection with the greater elementals of Lorwyn. Flamekin regard their creators as totems, symbols of life, and their original progenitors. In Flamekin society, they're treated as demigods, and are used for both creative inspirations and frustrating misunderstandings. In Flamekin society, there are those who seek to heal their tribe's jaded reputation, and others who seek fiery vengeance on their enemies, playing right into the other tribe's stereotypes. The famous Flamekin Aisling tried in vain to travel Lorwyn to find something better for her people, rebuilding the frayed relationships with other tribes. However, her fate would become all too complicated thanks to the events of Lorwyn's story. But nevertheless, Aisling has gone down in history as a legend to the Flamekin people. Aside from humans, goblins are the most prominent race found throughout the multiverse. But just as Lorwyn bucks the trend of native humans, it too is a world that sees goblins in a much different light. Goblins here are known as Boggarts, and they come in a wide array of different shapes, sizes, and colors. There's no perfect blueprint to what makes a Boggart and what it could look like, with some sporting impressive horns and tails and others who don't. The Boggarts of Lorwyn are less about a homogeneous appearance than they are about a unique society with its own customs, rules, and taboos. Boggarts, much like goblins of other planes, don't really have a set of laws they follow, being some of the less civilized of the Lorwyn tribes. However, they do have one imperative aspect to their culture, the idea of sharing. Sharing doesn't usually go hand in hand with a goblin race, but the Boggarts of Lorwyn are huge proponents of this altruistic practice. Of course, limiting the sharing to those of their own race. But what they decide to share is rather interesting. Much like magpies and dragons, Boggarts cherish shiny things. Baubles, swords, scepters, jewelry, you name it. It doesn't matter if it glitters, a Boggart wants it. But it's not just gold that's sought after, but rather any new or strange experience. They're known as collectors of sensations, and while they may not be intelligent per se, Boggarts are very perceptive and read into almost everything they experience. Simply tasting, feeling, or even smelling something new brings on a rush that's hard to describe. So as a collective tribe, the Boggarts work together to search for new sensations and share them with their kin. This idea of sharing sensations is held in such high regard that any member of this tribe caught keeping something new to themselves are branded a hoarder and are oftentimes exiled from Boggart society. Exile is one of the worst punishments a Boggart can face, as they are starved of new sensations provided to them by the various other members of the tribe. They sink into a deep depression, as all joy in their existence seems to end. Boggarts are surprisingly social creatures, thus making the sentence of exile particularly harsh. Boggart society, like other tribes on Lorwyn, are broken down into specific subgroups known as warrens. Each warren is differentiated by the types of treasures they covet, along with how they pursue those sensations. Take the Squeaking Pie Warren, for example. This Boggart group search for culinary delights, making their own recipes from ingredients stolen from others, often with questionable results. Still, with each meal, a new sensation comes with it. Or the Stink Drinker Warren, which are some of the sneakiest Boggarts on Lorwyn, housing some of the rarest treasures stolen right under the feet of giants. Or stranger still, the Mud Button Warren, the real party animals of Boggart society. They explore more carnal sensations, though their attitudes towards life is a bit mixed, leading many others in Boggart society to think this warren is quite crazy. Each warren is led by a Boggart elder, called in their tribe, aunties. Aunties are usually the oldest Boggart of the warren, with the most wisdom and knowledge to pass down to the younger generation. Mostly these are teachings of survival techniques, hunting strategies, and warnings of enemies and predators. While the term auntie often refers to a female Boggart, the title can too be used for males of this species who live long enough to reach this status. Probably the most famous auntie in Boggart society is Auntie Grub, who has inspired countless folklore and tales passed down from Boggart to Boggart. The Giants of Lorwyn have a similar build to others of this race on different planes, and that build is huge. Without a doubt, Giants are the strongest individual warriors on Lorwyn, with a martial skill to match that strength. However, this is countered by their lack of true cooperation within this tribe. As we have seen with other Lorwyn tribes, working together goes hand in hand with that tribe's survival. Giants, on the other hand, have a much more relaxed view on communal civilization. Rather than build up large villages of like-minded giants, this tribe is far more individualist. They will, on occasion, share areas of rest with fellow giants, but as a tribe, they're nothing like other races on Lorwyn. Giants here are hermits by nature, travelers of the land, isolated and often alone. And as every individual differs in their goals, each giant can differ wildly in their personalities. Giants have emotions that match their monstrous size. When a giant is happy and friendly, they can be some of the most jovial creatures on Lorwyn. But if one is angry and bitter, well, you better watch out and not be stepped on. In general, you can have really angry giants or really nice giants, and there's no blueprint on how one will act if you approach them. Unlike the stereotypical hulking dim-witted giants of other planes, those on Lorwyn again come in a wide array of intellectual capacity. We see plenty examples of those much less educated giants, those who just throw big stones at anything running past them, but we also see great giant philosophers, whose shamanistic leaders practice complex magic, and even oracles or harbingers who commune with greater elementals, unlocking and even sharing the great secrets of Lorwyn with others. The level of curiosity a giant here can achieve is directly related to how far they're willing to travel. The wisest among this tribe are great hermits, sacrificing social interaction for profound wisdom. Because of their size, giants often have very large territories, with some being quite hostile when protecting their borders. The one true constant of giants, outside of their size, is that they seem to be very singularly focused. They become almost obsessed with one particular activity and will practice it over and over and over again. So if a giant is really into, let's say, smushing goblins, well, they're going to become a master in that. And if one is focused on exploration, then they will travel the world and reap the benefits of their findings. This is how giants can really be polar opposites even between individuals. One giant who took this trait to a legendary extreme would be Brian Stoutarm, a wandering sage who quite enjoyed the act of tossing smaller creatures as far as possible. Still, Brian wasn't aggressive by nature. even working alongside his siblings to aid an exiled elf named Rise, helping secure the fate of Lorwyn in its story. While Lorwyn seems to be a picturesque plane, a world of never-ending day, free of much strife, there are darker sides to it. Take the Elvish population of Lorwyn, the only tribe to be outwardly aggressive to the others on this plane. Elvish culture on Lorwyn is one dictated completely by the physical appearance of others. Rather than a caste system based on one's wealth, Elvish culture here bases wealth on one's individual attractiveness. As such, egos run high in every Elvish pack. There's no room for empathy, no room for debate. You're either born beautiful and with privilege, or you live a life in the muck. The laws of beauty have created 4 distinct tiers of elves, which act more as social classes. The first are the faultless, which are any elves who possess the minimum threshold of beauty and grace. While beauty may seem subjective to us, to the elves of Lorwyn it's quite objective, and those who are at least noticeable can achieve this lowly status. The next are the immaculate. These are beautiful elves who can serve as civil leaders and act as dignitaries. They're a higher level of class and perform more important duties, which offers them greater opportunities. The next are the exquisite. These are packmasters, leaders of local elvish groups or warbands. They're acting commanders, hunters, and are given the exclusive privilege of talking with the most beautiful and influential elves in their society. And those elves are known as the perfect. Perfect is the rank given to those objectively stunning elves, the unquestioned leaders of this tribe with looks that are unparalleled. To be considered a perfect, one not only needs to meet physical peaks, but also be shrewd, intelligent, and crafty. Though only a few of these perfects exist, perfects are given authority over any matter and their word becomes law. They can also kill those of lesser ranks, faultless and under, with impunity. To be perfect means that you rule the Elves of Lorwyn. While these 4 ranks exist in Elvish culture, there is one final tier reserved for those deemed too ugly to even lay eyes on. These are known as eyeblights. This rank is granted to those with physical deformities, average appearances, or those not of the Elvish race. Yes, all other tribes on Lorwyn to the Elves are considered eyeblights, and that means they can, and Elves are, encouraged to kill them at their leisure. Because of their cultural mindset, Elves have given themselves the title of Lords on Lorwyn, believing they claim exclusive rights on all the lands that exist here. They are naturally tyrannical, abusive, and genocidal, meaning most of the other tribes often build up defense measures simply to protect themselves from Elves. The Elves often create packs or hunting parties to go out and scrub eyeblights from Lorwyn. In this gruesome act, the Elves employ a poison they cultivate from a white flower known as moonglove. This is a rare plant that only the Elves have access to, but when combined with magic, it becomes an alchemic poison that can kill even giants with a single tipped arrow. In this, the Elves of Lorwyn are different from those on other planes, not working alongside nature to protect it, but using it for their own means and often seeing flaws in nature that they would change or improve upon. They use nature as a tool rather than see it as their ally. In this, they use a powerful form of magic on a plant called nettlevines. Normally, the nettlevines employ a toxin to protect themselves from predators, but the Elves amp this up and use it in binding spells on their enemies. The nettlevines act as parasites, sinking deep into the victim's tissue, taking over their minds and bodies. This painful experience results in a vine-bred minion, zombies twisted and bound to the Elves' will. Among the Elves, one individual stands out as someone who stands against his people's more barbarous practices. Rise, a member of the exquisite class and leader of his own pack, was well-traveled and came to learn the benefits of the other tribes. Through conversations with ancient beings and the sharing of wisdom, Rise has grown a new respect for those he once deemed eyeblights. However, this change didn't go over well with his people, and so Rise was exiled. But in doing so, the Elves set him down a path that would save all of Lorwyn. The Fae of Lorwyn are bar none one of the strangest races to exist on this plane. They're creatures driven purely by selfish desires and emotions. Essentially, fairies embody some of the more toxic aspects of one's personality. While not nearly as egotistical as the elves, fairies exhibit cruel and vindictive tendencies, holding deep grudges and carelessly pranking any and all they see fit. Pranks, to the Fae, is their most cherished leisure activity. But these are far from harmless misadventures. Bordering on sadistic, a fairy prank can often end with the victim's death, all while the fairies watch on and cackle with smug satisfaction. Unlike the elves, who are more lawful evil following their own laws as corrupt as they may be, fairies are truly chaotic, acting on whatever fancy passes them by. While the Fae are a prominent presence on the landscape of Lorwyn, very little is known about their lives, biology, or species origins. While their indifference is well recorded, little else is truly known, as fairies live very secretive lives. It's said that all fairies believe they're born from a figure known as the Great Mother, a singular being of worship in fairy culture. They claim to serve this figure, the Queen of the Fae, known as Una, but to what purpose is still unknown. Una is seldom seen, only discussed in Fae culture, so many believe it to be strictly a mythical entity meant to represent the fairy's origin story. However, Una is anything but a fairy tale. The Queen of the Fae is in fact a real individual who holds sway over every Fae born on Lorwyn. They do her bidding and act on their queen's behalf. One of the most important tasks charged by their queen is the collection of a substance known as dream stuff. Fairies are unable to dream on their own. In fact, it's not even known if they can biologically sleep. So rather than try to dream on their own, fairies go out and farm dreams from other sentient beings. This sparkling energy is magically extracted from other creatures and then later consumed at their queen's discretion, likely experiencing the dreams devoured in almost a hallucinogenic manner. It's unknown what other purpose this dream stuff could be used for, but some on the plane have noted that dreams in fact hold magical properties on this plane. The amount collected by the Fae could represent a stockpile of untold magical energy. Maybe this dream stuff is the power that keeps the location of the Fae and their queen hidden from the rest of Lorwyn. While the Fae and Una call Glen Alandra their home, it's another task entirely to find its exact location, a secret the race as a whole guard with their lives. Aside from their personalities and their leader, fairies are only known to live extremely short lives. In this, the Fae are much like insects who exist only for a fleeting fragment of time before they die and are replaced by another of Una's brood. It's believed that it's this limited lifespan that leads to the Fae's childlike behavior and naive cruelty. Rarely does a fairy ever travel alone. More often than not, you'll find them grouped together with 3 or 6 members, forming what are known as cliques. Cliques are a social group who look out for one another and perform complicated pranks that require more than one single fairy. These cliques represent the only real social structure of the Fae, outside of the direct leadership of Una herself. This is famously represented by the Vendilion clique, the personal clique of Queen Una who perform her most personal requests. This clique is made up of 3 fairy triplets, Visa, Endri, and Iliona. Each member of this clique brings its own personality and quirks, but still works seamlessly together to accomplish whatever their queen wishes. Planeswalkers are a unique race to Lorwyn. That being, it was the very first set in Magic the Gathering's history to introduce these characters and this card type. Planeswalker cards have since come to define modern MTG world building and lore, as it's a primary card mechanic for the game. Of course, Planeswalkers as a whole aren't native to the world of Lorwyn, simply being added to the set as an experiment, a proof of concept. In fact, of these Planeswalkers introduced with Lorwyn, none are natives to this plane, and to our knowledge, none have even visited Lorwyn, as they played no role in the overall story of this world. When discussing Planeswalkers tied to Lorwyn, we have no currently known Planeswalkers native to this plane. However, we do have at least one recorded journey of a Planeswalker on Lorwyn, that being the elf Nissa Ravain. As a very young Planeswalker, Nissa first traveled through the Blind Eternities and encountered Lorwyn, because of her unique magic, Nissa communed with the world soul of Lorwyn, which was vastly different from her native home of Zendikar. Nissa could feel the pain of this otherwise idyllic plane, as the world soul ached with the coming Great Aurora. While traveling on Lorwyn, Nissa met with the native elves here, who impressed the young planeswalker. Nissa cherished their beauty and how elvish civilization was considered the pinnacle here. She believed the elves to be the bulwark of Lorwyn and ideal for others to live up to. But that belief was quickly subverted as Nissa joined a pack for a hunt. As Nissa was tracking down Boggarts with the Lorwyn elves, who had come to admire her otherworldly appearance, she began to understand the true depravity of this, quote, pinnacle civilization. When once Nissa's supremacy beliefs would have enjoyed the Lorwyn elves' station in society, she now found their egos distasteful, discovering that the Boggarts, in fact, were not a threat to the elves, but were being hunted simply because of their appearance. Nissa left the hunt, just as the Great Aurora overtook Lorwyn, transforming it to its dark reflection of Shadowmoor. This strange and powerful magic was enough to cause Nissa to planeswalk away before she could study the consequences of such a spell, setting the elf down a journey throughout the rest of the multiverse. It's unclear if we will ever again see a planeswalker visit Lorwyn. While the tribes of Lorwyn are presented in a certain light, for good or bad, the plane itself lives in relative harmony. With camps and lines drawn between the races and only minor conflicts flaring up, aside from the elvish hunts, Lorwyn is noted as being one of the most peaceful and idyllic planes in the entire multiverse. But this world carries with it a secret, a cycle lasting 300 years. While Lorwyn is bathed in constant daylight and the tribes benefit from perpetual spring harvests, a natural event known as the Great Aurora threatens to change everything we know about Lorwyn. Lorwyn is a world plagued by two extremes, night and day, mirrored realities that overtake one another in a natural cycle. This change is known as the Great Aurora, a glimmering, beautiful display of lights in the night sky, often celebrated by the denizens of Lorwyn, hides a terrible magic that switches this plane inwards and upside down. A new reality blankets the once peaceful, idyllic Lorwyn, and in a flash, Shadowmoor becomes reality. Shadowmoor is the inverse of Lorwyn. Rather than endless days with an abundance of food and cheer found on Lorwyn, Shadowmoor is a dark, twisted quagmire of swamplands, salted flats, and inhospitable landscapes. Everything on Shadowmoor becomes dangerous, aggressive, and upside down, right down to its denizens. While many of the races on Lorwyn are delightful in their own unique ways, maybe not as welcoming as you would like, but still very level-headed, once Shadowmoor arrives, its magic taints anything that was once good about their tribe. The whole plane retreats further into their corners, untrusting, paranoid, and fearful. When the Great Aurora happens, every sentient life form is changed, right down to their memories. Very few will ever be able to recall the rolling green hills of Lorwyn. A switch in their mentality is flipped, and they can only ever remember their lives on Shadowmoor. Though some special few seem to be exempt from this rule, they're considered the rare exceptions. As this is a natural occurrence, a part of the magical essence of this plane, there's no real way to stop the Great Aurora from happening. It's a force that normally happens as the sun sets every day. By day, this plane is Lorwyn, and by night, it is Shadowmoor. This effect and all the consequences of it are meant to happen repeatedly on a regular day-night cycle. But, as we'll see later, there are those who succeeded in controlling it. For now, let's run down how exactly the Tribes of Lorwyn become affected by this change. What happens to them in Shadowmoor? As Shadowmoor occurs, the tribes go through a great number of changes, all based on their mana alignments being altered slightly from what they were on Lorwyn. Kithkin go from green-white to white-blue, Merrows go from blue-white to blue-black, Treefolk from green, black, and white to just green and black, and so on. But how do these new mana alignments brought on by the Great Aurora impact their personalities? The Kithkin take on a new, more frightening appearance, taking on aspects of a nocturnal animal. The Kithkin become more bestial in their behaviors as well. Their eyes become larger and glow with reflective light as they strain to see through the unrelenting darkness of Shadowmoor. Their clachans or villages become not welcoming open cities of camaraderie, but downs, towering fortresses with sturdy walls meant to repel rather than host. In their thought weft, their communal web of consciousness, it remains, but instead of profiting from the empathy of others, feelings of rage, anger, and paranoia are shared, effectively putting the entire tribe in a state of panic. When a threat is detected, any small minor slight that enters the thought weft, an entire Kithkin doom can tilt to a riot. While the Kithkin weren't always the most open and trusting of the other tribes, they certainly practiced in trade and discussions with others outside of their race. Now on Shadowmoor, the Kithkin have fallen deeper into isolation, trusting no one outside of their tribe and going to extreme lengths to keep outsiders, well, outside. Rather than rely on their ability to heal through salves and potions, Kithkin and Shadowmoor use their alchemy to craft deadly poisons to fend off threats. And instead of keeping a book of knowledge on how to help others in their tribe, the Book of Kith and Kin becomes the Book of Other Folk, detailing the terrors of the other tribes and how best to vanquish them. This is certainly a polar opposite to the Kithkin we see on Lorwyn, but such is the power of the Great Aurora. The Treefolk still practice shamanism, but with a decidedly darker tinge. As Shadowmoor is a world almost devoid of green, Treefolk lose all flowering branches and any semblance of leaves. Their once resilient bark is dried and wilted, as they appear more like tree skeletons than anything alive. Like Kithkin, the Treefolk of Shadowmoor have become distrustful of other races, unwilling to share their knowledge and fearful of their actions. In one proverb of the Treefolk in Shadowmoor, it's said that the other tribes have, quote, breath ablaze with unnatural fire, and the flame shall consume and purify our rage. A prediction of the end times for this race, which goes to show you just how much they don't trust the other races of Shadowmoor. The Boggarts too go through a physical change as well as a behavioral one. They become much more animalistic, almost deformed in some of their body proportions. While Boggarts were never the smartest tribes of Lorwyn, in Shadowmoor they become outwardly aggressive beyond reason. Rather than share sensations with one another, Boggarts on Shadowmoor only share in their display of violence, with those who commit the most heinous acts being the most respected. They become mindless brutes, a shadow of their former selves, who at times on Lorwyn could show flashes of respectability as a race. As the change overtakes them though, even their aunties aren't spared, as Wart, a famous auntie, becomes a raid mother, a leader in constant war dictating attacks on the other tribes without mercy. The Merrows of Shadowmoor still stick to the waters, but their purpose in the Merrow lanes has changed from guidance and trade to ruthless piracy. The Merrow's physical appearances take on more of a deep-dwelling aquatic form, resembling the dark meanders that they so feared when the plane was Lorwyn. Now the Merrows embrace the darkness of the crushing depths and use it to their advantage while stalking the other tribes. The Merrow of Shadowmoor are more pirates than honest merchants, raiding any civilization that wanders too close to the water's edge, and using the connecting rivers as their own personal highways to plunder. They exploit, kidnap, and murder without hesitation, with even one of their greatest figures, Sig, becoming nothing more than an unruly cutthroat. The elementals of Shadowmoor are decidedly darker, becoming avatars of wrath and destruction, and as their scions, the Flamekin too have taken on a far more foreboding visage. The Flamekin of Shadowmoor no longer go by their Lorwyn name, but instead are known as Cinders. Cinders always burn bright hot, but sometimes in faintly unnatural colors like purple. Cinders are physically much more imposing than their Lorwyn counterparts, much more explosive with far greater density of fire than rock. The culture of Cinders is an exaggeration of those Flamekin who seek vengeance on the plane that was so hostile to them. To the Cinders, this fear is taken to an extreme. They truly believe they don't have a place in Shadowmoor, and so rather than share it with those who would see them perish, the Cinders lash out and attack any and all those that don't glow bright in the night. The old Treefolk proverb they have on Shadowmoor, yeah, that's directly referencing the Cinders, who use the wood and skin of Treefolk as coal to forge their weapons, believing the magic of the Treefolk enchant their weapons as well. Affected too is their relationship with the greater elementals, who on Lorwyn they once worshipped. Here on Shadowmoor, the Cinders believe these elementals hold secrets of fire that they have lost. So, as a tribe, they capture and perform painful experiments on fire elementals seeking the secrets that they may keep. The Giants of Shadowmoor lose most of their positive traits as Lorwyn is lost to the Dark Knight, when once they were a race of fairly varied temperaments, with many being gentle wanderers and shamans, now have fallen to more stereotypical giant behaviors. Shadowmoor giants seem to have a constant need to settle down. Rather than the hermits that we saw on Lorwyn, they desperately seek a place to permanently reshape the land for their needs, regardless of whomever may currently be living there. Shamans still exist among the giants, but they use their magic to shape mountains and valleys for their homes, displacing entire villages of other races in the process. Even those without magical abilities still value land, even if it's not their own, often becoming quite jealous of the other tribes' houses. Giants will smash the residents of other races simply out of spite and wishing they too had a home. And finally, we come to the Elves, which in a bizarre twist of fate actually become a little less tyrannical on Shadowmoor as compared to Lorwyn. Where previously, during the day, the Elves lorded over the other races who simply couldn't compete with their skill in combat, now are threatened just like every other tribe on Shadowmoor. In Shadowmoor, resources are scarce and threats loom in every dark corner. Each tribe becomes more aggressive and thus wars flare up all the time. As a result, Elves couldn't build their long-lasting kingdom and get to their Lorwyn level of supremacy. Like any other tribe on Shadowmoor, the Elves must meek out survival, thus humbling them. The idea of beauty to the Elves is expanded as Shadowmoor twists everything around them. Beauty is in short supply, so the Elves can't be as picky as they were on Lorwyn. Other creatures can display beauty so long as they're not ravenous, murderous madmen. A low bar to clear, I know, but this is what the Elves look for now on Shadowmoor. They take on a noble quest from birth to protect the scarce, beautiful things found on Shadowmoor, saving it from the encroaching darkness and ugly denizens who look to taint all things. In this, the Elves of Shadowmoor are much more altruistic than they are on Lorwyn. Even uncivilized races, like the Changelings, take on a much more darker aesthetic. Rather than playfully adopting their surroundings, Changelings on Shadowmoor are known as mimics, who use their shapeshifting ability to hunt prey, which goes to show that the power of the Great Aurora doesn't just impact the civilized tribes of Lorwyn, but even plants and animals. While many of the tribes experience a drastic change from Lorwyn to Shadowmoor, oftentimes for the worse, there is one group who have avoided any such consequence of this natural event: the Fae. Yes, fairies are the same on Shadowmoor as they are on Lorwyn, and that includes their memories. As such, we don't really need to explain how the shift to Shadowmoor impacts this race, as it effectively doesn't. But what's interesting is how the Fae prevent the loss of their memories and change in behavior, and that's all because of their queen, Una. Long ago, Una, the progenitor of all Fae on this plane, somehow came to learn about the day-night cycle of this mirrored world. Through trials and experiments, Una was able to slowly realize when the Great Aurora occurred and how it impacted the world, and even herself and her children. Una didn't like what she and her fairies would become each night when Shadowmoor settled, so the Great Mother looked to prevent it. This is where it's believed the collection of dream stuff, the magical dream energy harvested from the other tribes, comes into play. Its strong magical potential likely was used in a spell by Una to cast a shroud over all fairies so that Shadowmoor didn't impact them like it did the rest of the plane. But Una wasn't happy with just existing through this cycle over and over. She also looked to manipulate the Great Aurora itself to her benefit. Being able to retain one's memory during the Great Aurora was already an amazing boon. However, Una wanted more. She wanted to be able to dictate when this change occurred. With the other tribes being none the wiser, Una would secretly be the most powerful being on Lorwyn or Shadowmoor. So slowly, with her minions collecting more and more dream stuff, Una began weaving a spell into the very fabric of the plane's world soul. With each passing day, Una was able to extend the daylight, at first by merely seconds, then minutes, then hours, then months, and then even years. Una artificially extended the day, meaning the plane remained as Lorwyn until it was Lorwyn for 300 years straight. This was ideal for Una, as the tribes during this time were more easily manipulated than their darker counterparts. But still, the Great Aurora couldn't be held back forever, and as the day was extended, so too was the night. So when the Great Aurora eventually did come, it too lasted 300 years before the sun again broke past the horizon. 300 years as Lorwyn, then 300 years as Shadowmoor. This was the new cycle, completely in control of Una, Queen of the Fae. That is, until one day, the Great Aurora arrived outside of Una's control. Many monsters that don't exist on Lorwyn come skulking from the shadows or dark depths once this world changes to Shadowmoor. The most apparent new threats are relatives to Lorwyn's goblins, the Boggarts. These are subspecies who hide and sleep during the day, hunting at night through Shadowmoor. These include the murderous redcaps. Their physical features such as huge eyes and small figures make them dangerous hunters in low light. Unlike Lorwyn Boggarts, redcaps are actively homicidal for personal pleasure, dyeing their hats in the red blood of their victims. Others are the Spriggans, an odd type of goblin with yellowish skin and long pointed ears. They possess the power to grow in size and often live in the forests of Shadowmoor. Other strange creatures who exist only in Shadowmoor with no apparent presence on Lorwyn include the subterranean Dargers. These are an offshoot of the Dwarven race who, by all knowledge, only surface on this plane when it's Shadowmoor. The Darger are master diggers and miners, creating large sprawling cities deep underground. Some civilizations of this race are so far down that many don't even believe that the surface world exists. Many are so delusional that, when evidence of the surface is presented, the Dargers lash out in paranoid anger. Shadowmoor also introduces the seldom seen creature type, Hag. Hags seen on other planes are female beings with strong magical ties and typically cast dark spells at the expense of others. Hags show up in the swamplands of Shadowmoor and prey on those who wander too closely to their rotten farmlands. While standard hags are believed to be goddesses who fall from grace, leaving them wild and aggressive, other hags like the Gwalian exist. These are beings who simply practice witchcraft, but are otherwise normal, civilized humanoids. Well, as civilized as a hag could get. One of the odder creatures on Shadowmoor are the Noggle. This humanoid race is defined by their small, Kithkin-sized bodies accompanied by the head of a horse or donkey. While they have hands with normal digits, they walk on hooved feet and have prominent haunched backs. Noggles believe they're the oldest race on Shadowmoor, seeing the other races and tribes as intruders on their world. As such, most Noggles are kleptomaniacs, stealing everything they see under the misguided impression that everything on Shadowmoor belongs to them. Trolls are the native race of trolls on Shadowmoor. They're about as smart as trolls on other worlds get, that being not very, but are also much smaller than their multiversal counterparts. They're a rather obscure race, with the Trow territory only being the moors of Shadowmoor. Their diet is mostly carrion, the rotten corpses of the dead that wash up in their swamps. Like the Trow, the Ophi come out only during Shadowmoor. Again, these are small humanoids who are more of a nuisance than a fresh new threat to this dark world. They covet treasure and trinkets, and are beings of pure magic and mysticism. Even simple constructs like scarecrows take on a much darker air in Shadowmoor. Scarecrows that exist on Lorwyn are built by Kithkin farmers to help keep their crops safe and free of birds. Yet, as night falls, the Kithkin of Shadowmoor enchant their scarecrows with magical spells to make them more effective at their jobs. Unfortunately, some of the spells work too well, and if the scarecrows get loose from their creators, they can take on a life of their own. An outbranch of these sentient scarecrows have even built their own pseudo-civilization, led by the frightening Reaper King. And lastly, the tragic and rarely discussed Selkies. Selkies are a new addition to the waters of Shadowmoor, joining the nasty merfolk in the Merrow lanes. Selkies are humanoids, but unlike the Merrow, their bottom half is that of a seal rather than a fish, making them closer relatives to centaurs. Little is known about this race, but they act as if they're not even natives to Shadowmoor. Selkies pine for the open waters of oceans and large lakes, bodies obviously missing from Lorwyn or Shadowmoor. They feel trapped by the small rivers of the Merrow lanes, making them bitter and melancholy. They can be heard singing sad songs by the lane's edge, tragic sirens with cold and unknown meaning. Because of this constant despair, some believe that Selkies are somehow not native to Shadowmoor, but rather trapped here from another world. Lorwyn is a world plagued by change, whose natural behavior has been bastardized by an unnatural force. The soul of this plane reminds us all of the dark world of Innistrad, who too suffers from cycles of change. But unlike Innistrad, Lorwyn and its counterpart Shadowmoor don't share a common soul, but rather are two opposed forces struggling between day and night. The two live in balance, But what happens when that balance is threatened? How do the denizens on this world, who forget their very natures when the plane shifts, ever hope to save it from ruin? Is this cycle of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor destined to overwrite one another time and time again? How can heroes hope to rise up when in Shadowmoor, they're damned to become villains? The story of the Lorwyn and Shadowmoor blocks takes us on an adventure of the collective tribes of this plane banding together to stop an invisible threat to their world. One they've all experienced before but could never remember. Now the fate of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor hangs in the balance, just as the Mending threatens the careful plans of Una and gives the heroes an opportunity to act. Be sure to click the subscribe button and tick the notification bell in order to catch the complete history of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor's story. If you're interested in learning the story, be sure to follow the links in the description below. As always, thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed your time learning about this unique world. If you want to show your support for this content, consider leaving a like, sharing the video, or becoming a member to the channel. As always, thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. See ya!